Hi, my name is De'Ara. I'm your host today, and we have joining us Kwame and Patricia. How are you?
How are you?
We're great.
Good, awesome. And Kwame and Patricia are both members of the Innis Conglomerate, and they're here to talk about the legacy of Roy Innis and also CORE and why they've founded the group. So, what is the Innis Conglomerate and how did it come about?
The Innis Conglomerate is a group of Roy Innis's children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, and cousins. It was formed sometime in 2017 by our younger brother, Mugabe Innis. He formed the organization initially for us to spend time communicating and helping each other with whenever there are problems within the family. As the organization grew, it changed, and it changed into one of a political form where we are involved in the civil rights of the day.
Yes, and for those who are not familiar with the late Roy Innis, can you please touch on that for us?
CORE, Roy Innis is a national chairperson of CORE. He is deceased now. He died January 8th, 2017. CORE stands for the Congress of Racial Equality, and it's a it's a not-for-profit civil rights organization that was formed in 1942 by James Farmer. The Congress of Racial Equality initially was a pacifist organization that believed in nonviolence. Congress of Racial Equality started in Chicago, and it spent time with desegregation of the South. They had several initiatives. The first initiative was the Freedom Rides, where you had young students going down by bus to the South to desegregate public facilities. Then they also had the Freedom Summer, where they spent time with young people, again, young college people, going down south to help register the different people for voting. It was a voters registration program. Then in 1963, they had a march in Washington, which was very influential. In 1968, Roy Innis was voted in the national chairman of CORE, and CORE at that point changed its philosophy. The ideology of CORE changed, and it moved from a pacifist organization to a black nationalist organization and one of separatism. Roy Innis did not believe that black people should desegregate the South. He believed that black people should stay within their own communities, just like Malcolm X and somewhat of the Black Panthers and of the black Muslims of the time, that blacks should stay within their own communities and control their own economic reality.
Excuse me. So, is there any relation to what people believe Martin Luther King also thought in his last days, that maybe he might be leading his people into a burning building?
Exactly.
And that we should stay within our own community? Do you still believe in the nonviolence?
Oh, absolutely. We believe in nonviolence, and Roy Innis' philosophy has changed. From what he was in the 1960s, 70s, the world changed. And because the world changed, Roy Innis changed. And he became more of a staunch conservative. And it was very shocking to many people. But his views changed because the world changed and the politics of the world changed. So his conservatism was more aligned with Republican views. And this was what he became in the late 80s, 90s, and the 200s, in the years of the 200s.
Pat, let me jump in there for a second,
Yes.
because I don't want people to get the idea that all of a sudden he became some right-wing conservative and with all of the negative attributes that may bring up in your mind. And that was everything furthest from the truth. He was, in his mind, what he decided was for us to be all one group favoring one party and the other party able to ignore us was a stupid idea. If the Democrats had us in their pocket and they didn't have to give us anything to get us there, and the Republicans knew that we weren't going to vote for them, then they wouldn't have any reason to give us anything or to pander to us or to be fair with us or to open up and start dialogue. We would just be a one-party group of people, and that's not to our advantage. That was what he was trying to get across.
Yes, that is very true. The idea of black people all being Democrats was a problem for Roy Innis.
And I think many people associate Democrats differently than they do for Republicans or any other party. I'm not sure why that is.
My personal opinion is those constructs don't help us one bit. You won't have a job with the Democrats, you won't have a job with the Republicans. As African American peoples, as Spanish speaking, indigenous peoples who are from this hemisphere, nothing changes in your life whether the Republicans or the Democrats are in charge. Nothing changes. Nothing at all changes.
Now more than ever, it seems that if you are labeled a Republican, that you believe in all of the sayings of President Trump, and that's not a great thing per se. So it seems like now more than ever, the world is in turmoil with Democrats versus Republicans.
Well, if the message is mean-spirited and bigoted, to me, it's a no-brainer to be on the side of righteousness and right.
Yes.
Some of the messages that are coming out now are mean-spirited, they're bigoted, and they're just wrong. They're wrong historically, and they're just wrong culturally. This nation is founded on certain principles, and we only want to observe those principles when certain people in power can make money and makes them feel good. But each and every one of those principles is meant to be followed. It includes everybody. It doesn't. There's no such thing as we weren't talking about you. That's a construct that they would like to keep in your mind. But I think anything could be furthest from the truth. I believe that all of those amendments relate to all of us.
Yes, I agree. And so CORE has had a long history in civil rights. So will the conglomerate also do the same?
Yes. We plan to have another, another show after this show. And we're going to discuss a 4-point plan of what could be more likely taken as our declaration of what needs to be done to handle a lot of the police brutality that's happening right now. The police brutality has been going on from the history of this country. However, because of technology, what people have been saying has been happening, it can be seen now. People didn't see it. And it's amazing what happens, just like in the civil rights movement where when it was televised, once the 1960s was televised in terms of what was happening in the South, people wanted change. And that is what's going to make the change. The televising of the different incidences that are happening with the police and people of color is going to demand for a change to occur in this country.
Yes, it seems like history is repeating itself as far as you touched on police killings and recordings of things and people being fed up and demanding a change. So that happened once before, and then the system basically destroyed different groups like Black Panther and so on. So now is it time for that rise again, for people to come together and maybe make a change? Because people are tired of marching and just talking about it.
Definitely, definitely. You have to, if we're going to have change, we have to have new methods. We can't go with the same old methods. My sister Corinne in the 4-point program is a wonderful program. You know, it's real estate based. We need to own things. If you don't own anything, if you're renting from other groups, that's not your neighborhood. You know, people call these neighborhoods theirs, but they don't actually own it.
Just to piggyback off of what you're saying, speaking of renting and not owning, so what do you think about gentrification going on here in New York nowadays? I feel that people are upset and they're saying that their neighborhoods are being taken over, the rent has raised, but at one point, weren't houses very inexpensive about 30 years ago, and a lot of people did not take advantage of that. And
Exactly.
now different ethnicities are coming in and owning buildings, and they're only renting to non-black, not people of color.
Well, because the market rate is so high in the inner city areas, these gentrification plans or programs happen 10, 15, like you say, 20 years in advance. When all of these buildings were empty in Harlem, in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, you know, there were groups who got together and said, okay, you know what? We can buy these now. The taxes are minimal. We can rehab them. And if we make a 10, 15, 20-year plan, we can turn this neighborhood around.
Great, thank you. So we'll be back with more information, and just sit tight. Thank you.
Your son wants to get a cat, but you're allergic. Do you A, prepare yourself, B, make the best of it,
C squared equals
25.
Good job.
or C, find a loophole? When it comes to parenting, there are no perfect answers, but that's okay, because you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Teens in foster care will love you just the same. You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it,
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got, or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, baby.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, let's crawl.
Hello again, I'm your host, De'Ara, and we're here with Mr. Kwame and Patricia from the Conglomerate. And you want to touch bases on the 4 points of actions we must take.
Well, just to go back to point number one, we're talking about the real estate and land and how these programs are perpetrated over 10, 15, 20 years. You know, they destabilize a neighborhood or a borough or a city. And then when the prices come down, of course, what they say, when there's blood in the street, buy property. So then they come, they buy everything up, and then all of a sudden, the place that you've lived in, or your grandmother, you've had 3 or 4 generations living in this apartment, but paying rent and not owning, now you're put out, you're displaced, doesn't belong to you. And the reality then hits you that this was never mine. this was never my neighborhood because I didn't own anything. You know, that's one of the most important things. Of course, education. If our people aren't educated, and not just rote education to work for someone and to get a job, but education in terms of having your own businesses. When I look at my parents and my aunts and uncles' yearbooks from the 50s and 60s, the vocational and the structure of the education was to let you start your own business or to go on and further your education, higher education. But it didn't just put you on the street as a wage slave. You know, I mean, if you came out and you were actually, you had mortician science, you came out, you had cleaning, you had automotive, you had electrical, you had plumbing, you had nursing. There was a wonderful woman at John F. Kennedy High School. Her name was Miss Parsons, and there was a nursing program that she ran there for, I would say, over 25 years, and she put thousands of nurses into the New York City system from her high school program, where they took nursing as you know, the basic courses as an LPN, and then they went and sat for the state exams, and then they could go on to college and get their RN and their masters. And she educated hundreds of men and women in the city.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so what is your long-term goal with the conglomerate?
We plan to have a talk show, which is this show here, and we plan to have guests come in and discuss different points of our 4-point plan. We will discuss the civil rights issues of the day.
Well, speaking of that, how do you see the civil rights issue in today's society? How do you view it?
Many of the grassroots organizations that we're used to from our childhood are, for the most part, gone. They've morphed into these other things. The NAACP that we used to see and hear so often, the SNCCs, the COREs that we used to see. CORE no longer has a physical standing office here in New York City. Right now, we're based in Las Vegas. The Nation of Islam isn't what it once was in terms of that visible presence that you saw, you know, on every street corner. So a lot of those organizations have morphed and they've changed. Change is good. And if you don't change, you die. You don't grow. But we need some different ideas, and I think the action plan speaks to that. That we have to get property, educate. We have to have businesses. If you don't own your businesses, if someone can come into your neighborhood and start a business, not employ anyone from your neighborhood, leave with the money, and then educate their children elsewhere, they're robbing you. It's a robbery. You know, our people have to see that as a robbery. If a business comes into our community, the same way we rate A, B, or C in terms of cleanliness, a neighborhood should rate them A, B, and C in terms of how they relate to the neighborhood. If you don't employ anyone in the neighborhood, you shouldn't be able to get an A. If you are a store that is consistently predatory and you're following people around the store and you're abusive in your language, you shouldn't be able to get an A or a B. You know, if all you do is open up a nail salon, you don't employ any nail techs, any estheticians, anything, and these, you know, people of color come in and they have their nails and their feet done every day, and then you just run back to your community, then you're robbing us. And there should be something done about that. And we as a community should not patronize businesses that don't patronize us.
And this is something that Roy Innis talked about back in the 1960s, 70s, and early 80s. He, as a black nationalist, was more of a separatist because of the times. But he talked about the fact that blacks must control their own schools. They must control their neighborhoods. They must even control picking up the garbage. Even just the garbage collection was something that he said that blacks must control, because at that time, the garbage situation was a very difficult situation in the city, in New York City, that is, and some other communities in the South. So we're going back and taking some of what he believed in, and we're bringing it forward again because the time has gone right back. We have a new administration that is the opposite of the administration that was there before. And it is dismantling everything that we had in terms of what was progressive.
Yes. So I want to thank you again for joining us, Patricia and Kwame. We'll be going to break. Thank you.
We just finished dinner and it was time for homework. He hates homework.
It makes no sense.
I don't know how he finds anything in his backpack.
I can't find my backpack.
Finally, we found his assignment. He rushed through it. I wonder if he even learned anything.
I wasn't gonna get it right, so I just wanted to get back to playing my video game. At least I'm good at that.
I couldn't even read his handwriting.
Holding the pencil makes my hand hurt.
I know he's bright.
Why is it so hard for me?
He's
I'm
just
trying
gotta
as
try a
hard
little
as I
harder.
can.
When you can see learning and attention issues from their side, you can be on their side. That's why there's Understood.org, a free online resource for the parents of the 1 in 5 kids with learning and attention issues. Here you'll get personalized recommendations, practical tips, daily access to experts, and more. Go from misunderstanding to Understood.org.
Testing. Why did the girl ask the mushroom to dance? Because he was a fun guy.
Thank you. You got a king?
Go fish!
It only takes a moment to make a moment. Take time to be a dad today.
And we're back with Patricia and Kwame. I'm your host, De'Ara. And we just want to continue touching on the 4 points of action.
Well, just to go back to where we left off in terms of business and owning the businesses in your neighborhood. There's no community that you go into where the majority of the business owners don't look like the neighborhood except the African American community. That's the only neighborhood where other cultures come in and they're your dry cleaners, they're your supermarket, they're your gas station, they're everything that you need to function. And if they were to go away, then you wouldn't have anything because we don't establish businesses in our own neighborhoods. And there's a lot of reasons why we don't. I'm not pointing a finger and saying there's something wrong with us. I'm saying systemically over this last 120, 30 years, there are things in place to stop that. But we have to take control of that, and we have to be our own, best guide.
Definitely. And you touched on legislation.
Legislation,
You wanted
yeah.
to touch on that.
If you can't do anything in terms of voting legislation, then you're dead. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is through the ballot initiative. You can put something on the ballot, get the appropriate number of signatures, and then have a community vote the way they want, instead of relying on a politician to vote, his or her conscience, when many times their consciences are compromised, whether it's financially, socially, or some other reasons. They may not necessarily vote the way that the community demographic thinks they should vote. And that's a huge problem with us. So we have to take over our school boards because if somebody's oppressing you, and we all as a group agree that we're being oppressed, then why put your education in the hands of people who are oppressing you? The biggest fear that I remember is when parents talked about educating their children at home in charter schools and pulling their children out of public schools. There was a big backlash, but the only kids that were suffering in these public school settings were children of color and poor children. So we need to take control of that, definitely.
Definitely. So let's talk about the police shootings. because for many, this is a new civil rights era. And I know that you're, as a retired policeman, could you give your opinion about those?
Okay, first I'd like to say I'm going to separate the 99% of law enforcement, male, female, whether you're a firefighter, corrections, on the street, in the courts, wherever you are, 99% of those people are doing the right thing, and they're doing it for the right reason. There's a 1%, you know, that's horrible. There's a 1% that's predatory, that's mean-spirited, that's bigoted, that's mentally ill, whatever you want to call it. But what they go out to do on a day-to-day basis is wrong. And I will call that 1% wrong in front of anybody. It's horrible. The things that we see, the things that actually get to us, number one, are only a fraction of what goes on. But when they actually get to us and we see what happens to people like the gentleman in Staten Island, you know, who, in my opinion, just was allowed to lay on the floor and choke and was not rendered medical aid. You know, what happens to Eleanor Bumpers, you know, 20, 30 years ago? What happened to Abner Louima? What happens to a lot of our people? Happened 20 years ago, happened 50 years ago, happened 100 years ago. Just because the uniform changes doesn't mean that the actions change. You know, no one should be going through that. No one.
Do you think that now more than ever, the video recordings of police killings and the unfair treatment is coming to surface? Does it seem like that never ever stopped in the first place, or is it just reoccurring history?
I agree with you. It's reoccurring history. It never stopped, and we have the advantage now in this technological age to have footage, to have audio and have video from the public as well as the officers. They have body cams on their persons as well as on their vehicles.
Great, yes. And I know that you have an event coming up that addresses the vulnerability of people of color and how they feel.
Yes, the Bronx Alumni Chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, to which I'm a member, is hosting a What to Do When Stopped by the Police workshop at the Bronx Criminal Courthouse, May 19th from 1 to 5. We're being hosted by Judge Bruce.
Great. So the event is called Law Enforcement Encounters, Survival Tips from A to Z.
Yes.
Awesome. So could you tell us where the public can attend this event and how can they get the information?
It's open, free to the public. It's, of course, we have a limited number of seating, so it's first come, first serve, but we definitely have an RSVP phone number, as in 646-238-9808. We have an email address, spring1911@gmail, and we have an Eventbrite. Thank you.
Great. So that wraps up our show today with guests Kwame and Patricia. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us, and we can't wait to come back.
Awesome. And take care. Until next time.